Let me start out by thanking everyone who posted their questions and making this video possible. Let's begin. Were there ever any ambitious members who wanted to expand to other cities with no mob presence? None that I personally knew of. And to be honest, if you put making money aside, any guy who likes a city with no mob presence most likely don't want to make his presence known either. How much of your time was taken up by mob activities or business outside of your regular job? Did it constantly feel like you didn't have enough time for yourself, or do you feel you had plenty? A great deal of my time was strictly dedicated to mob business or ongoings, even at times when I was at my legitimate job. There were plenty of times that I felt my life was no longer my own. When I first walked away, one of my first positive experiences was freedom to do what I pleased, as well as decide how to spend my time. Coincidentally, I recently had a conversation with a person that's still active in the life. And what do you think he complained about? This very subject, never having time to himself. Where were you when the Gus Harachi thing happened? What was your experience? And did you ever meet Anthony Spiro? Gus Harachi shot and killed DEA agent Everett Hatcher on February 28, 1989. At that time, I was still running around the street and didn't catch my case until 6 months later, in August of 1989. There was a lot of media coverage, and Harachi's face was plastered all over the papers. As for Anthony Spiro, I never met him. Do you think Vic putting Frankie Lastorino on the shelf saved Frankie's life from future indictments or getting killed? Anytime a person's put on a shelf or is no longer active, providing that he's not involved in any existing investigations, the probability of him getting indicted is significantly lesser than if he was active. So in that sense, yes, Frankie was spared dealing with any further indictments. And I don't believe Frankie's life was ever in jeopardy. And trust me, he stayed strapped up in case anyone had any ideas. By a strange coincidence, if you believe in them, here's another question regarding Frankie. If there was one thing you could have said to Frankie Lastorino, what would it be and why? When Frankie and I met, I mostly listened to what he had to say. He needed to get certain things off his chest, specifically regarding the murder of Patty Testa. And he also offered me several pieces of advice regarding that life. Before leaving him that afternoon, I believe I said the best thing I could have to him, which was, "It was a pleasure meeting you." Is it realistic or plausible for members of another family to attend the making ceremony of another family? It can happen, and there's no rule against it. I know of one person who attended a ceremony of another family, and I believe it was a dear friend of his that was being straightened out. But typically, a ceremony consists of members of the family that's conducting it. If you use canned tomatoes, is it crushed or peeled for your sauces? What's your go-to brand? One thing you should look for in a can is the letters DOP, which basically guarantees what you're buying is grown and packaged in this specific country. When buying canned tomatoes, I look for San Marzano tomatoes that are peeled and don't really have a favorite, but nothing beats fresh tomatoes, which I mostly use. When captains vote to elect or replace an official or acting boss, is a majority or unanimous vote required? Does the underboss and consigliere have any influence over the vote? Also, do captains ever vote on issues besides administration positions? Votes such as that is usually unanimous, but a majority vote can get the job done. An underboss and consigliere naturally can influence a vote by the captains that are close to either, who they'll typically push for, someone they're also in favor of. I don't know of any other voting by captains. I know when captains sit on a panel and make decisions, it's not necessarily a voting process. How did Joseph Watts get to be such a close associate of John Gotti and the Gambino family? Joe Watts' relationship with the Gambinos go back to Paul Castellano, even though he was part of the hit team that took Castellano out. How, or rather when Joe Watts became close to Gotti, I have no idea. Somewhere throughout the years, someone must have introduced him to Gotti. Joe Watts was an extremely high-level associate and would have been a member had he been Italian. What was your favorite dish to eat at Zio Totò? Most of the food there was good, and a lot of times while sitting at the bar, I would order the Gavatelli broccoli robin sausage. As quiet as it's kept, they also made good pizza there. Outside of your sports book, were you ever involved in any other gambling activities as a member? Initially, Joey DiBenedetto and I had a small sports business. I also had my own. And then near the end of my time, I was involved in another sports business with one of Patty Del Rosso's guys. The Lucchese's, specifically Big John, wanted me to make my cousin Louie, who's a heavy gambler, to place his bets with us. And when I say us, I mean at that time. They wanted to take his action, but I didn't do it and never pushed it. Mixing family and business never ends well. Why did so many guys like to wear tracksuits? Did you wear them when you were in the life? In the late 80s and 90s, sweatsuits were the style at the time. But during my time, they were already out of fashion. When you guys went out to eat as a group, who paid the bill? When I first got straightened out, in the beginning, Big John would make Johnny Sideburns go around and collect money from all of us to pay the tab. But then over time, we all would grab the check, including Big John at times. And near the end of my time, most of the time, Big John would grab it. At that point, Mikey DeSantis was in our crew, so John didn't want to look bad. And I've mentioned in the past that Mikey always would grab a check. When a captain goes to prison for an extended period of time, is a new captain eventually appointed, or does the acting captain run the crew until the imprisoned captain gets out? Either the acting captain or a new captain will take the crew over. During your time in the life, what were the skills the administration looked for when selecting a captain? If you put nepotism to the side, they will look for a guy who's an earner, someone who could take direction and carries himself correctly, and more importantly, a guy who demonstrates leadership skills. If a person who brings messages from an imprisoned boss to the administration and relays those messages in his favor, would the administration blindly trust him, or would they double check with the boss to see if it's true? How long would he get away with deceiving the administration? And what if the messenger left the country and left the mob for good? Would they look for him and kill him, or leave him alone? Patty Testa was killed because Gaspipe accused him of doing this very thing, which wasn't true. A messenger who twists messages can go for some time, bringing back false information. Eventually, the truth will come out, as it usually does. As far as the administration double checking with the boss, obviously they're not going to do that if they're using a messenger in the first place. If the guy leaves the mob and moves out of the country, or wherever he goes, what will happen to him depends on a lot of things. Most likely, he'll be left alone. Again, I'll say this. In present day, if the mob even conspires to kill someone, indictments will come raining down. This next person wants to know if I believe there are a lot of guys looking to get out of the mob, and what would they have to do to avoid trouble short of cooperating? I'll put it this way. There's a lot of guys who regret that they got straightened out and feel trapped in a life they no longer want to be a part of. Then you also have guys who are cooperators in the making. If they don't get pinched, all's well and good. But when a pinch comes, they'll cooperate to get themselves out of a prison sentence. There's only one way to escape. As I mentioned in a previous video, save your money, put your ducks in order, and move far away and cut off all contacts. Please remember to like this video if you haven't already. And for anyone that wants to show their appreciation for videos like this, you can do so down below. Which leads us to the final question. One I'm sure I've answered before. What advice do you have for a young kid on joining the mafia today? In a nutshell, my advice is look to do something positive with your life. Something where you never have to concern yourself with the FBI knocking on your door and locking you up. And over and above that, have people who you consider your friends look to kill you. Think of it this way. The mob is like getting in line to have your finger pricked with cancer. Would you volunteer for that? Because it's the same thing.